Before you take your seats, turn around to the person next to you, to your left and to your right, and tell them, I love Christmas. And you may be seated. During this week, I thought about, okay, what will I preach during Sunday's invitation in my home UCC church? What am I going to preach? Let me look at the lectionary. As you know, the Revised Common Lectionary is an incredible tool that I encourage pastors, especially in non-mainline settings, to consider. As many of you know, I also teach a course in preaching at a local seminary, and I get a chance to share with pastors, especially lay pastors, or pastors who may not have advanced theological education yet and are developing some of those educational skills, to look at the Revised Lectionary, to look at the Revised Common Lectionary is a wonderful tool for disciplining themselves and ourselves to the preaching act. It keeps us focused on the church year and the church's connection with its history and its texts. Now, of course, I'm also one of those kinds of preachers that loves preaching freely from perhaps a theme or a text that may evolve out of a moment of despair or a moment of happiness, a moment of a relationship with someone or some event or some theme of importance to the life of the church as a whole and to our lives and common lives together. But the Revised Common Lectionary is a great tool. It has its limits, like anything else that we use as tools. I think it has its limits. And an example of its limits is when you read the 4 elements or verses or lessons, rather, of assigned for that particular day or usually Sunday, and you seem to notice that the 4 lessons just don't jive together, or perhaps they don't have a continuity with one another or from the previous Sunday. And so I have a beef with the Revised Common Lectionary this morning that I want to share with you, and hopefully out of that beef, if you will, encourage us to be God's people in the world. One of those beefs is that often, again, you read the Revised Common Lectionary lessons for that Sunday, and again, you don't find a rhythm there, seemingly. And often, I don't. I come from not only a UCC congregational background, I also come from a Pentecostal background. So as a preacher, sometimes I have to kind of control myself. Or I'm probably more critical about the text because the lectionary, Revised Common Lectionary, and some of the lessons from others kind of want to narrow you down to a theme, and you want to push it a little longer, a little more, and that's what I want to do this morning. During the 70s, there was a hit show, lasted, I believe, 8-9 seasons. You all remember it. I'm not the only one who's dating myself here. All in the Family. Raise your hand. Okay. Of course, I loved that show after Star Trek. It was certainly one of my favorite 1970s TV hit shows. The lead character was a crusty old guy by the name of Archie Bunker. And Archie Bunker was a loud-mouthed bigot who uttered every stereotype known to humankind. The guy offended anything and everyone that it came across in front of his face. He always had a convoluted answer to all of life's quests. I never doubted he was smart, but boy, was he a bull in a china shop. His wife Edith, on the other hand, was one of the most sweetest and gentlest souls in the world that you can ever imagine. And then they had a daughter named Gloria and a son-in-law named Mike. Remember Meathead? They all lived together, at least for most of the seasons, in a working-class neighborhood in Queens, New York. Mike was of Polish descent. The Jeffersons' next-door neighbors were black. Edith's cousin Maud was a feminist, and later his partners in a local tavern enterprise he engaged with, unbeknownst to him, were Jewish. All these characters put together made for some incredible funny scenes and funny TV. One of my favorite episodes is the one you may recall. I'm sure some of you who watch all of these may recall. Edith and Archie are attending her high school reunion. And Edith encounters one of her old classmates from when she was young, and they just had a delightful time together that evening at the expense of Archie. His name was Buck. Buck, unlike his earlier days, had now become excessively larger than when he was younger. And Edith and Buck, again, just enjoy their evening together. Amazingly, Edith never noticed Buck had gotten a little bigger. Later, when Edith and Archie, at the end of the evening, at the end of the particular episode, were talking and chatting, Edith looks at Buck from afar and says to Archie, "Archie, ain't Buck a beautiful person?" Without a blink, Archie looks at her with an expression of exasperation and says, "You're a pip, Edith. You know that? You and I see the same guy, and you see a beautiful person, and I see a blimp." Edith, with the usual puzzled look on her face, looks at Archie and says, "Yeah, ain't it too bad?" Now that's the problem, kind of, with the reading for this morning, I think. Particularly the Colossians reading, which was the focus of my lesson for this morning. It's especially disconcerting for me right after the wonder of Christmas Day 2 years earlier in the whole Advent season. It just seems to me out of place, the Colossians lesson. It's disjointed. It's Archie's blimp rather than Edith's beautiful person. And yeah, ain't it too bad? Let me read the lesson for you this morning. Colossians 3, verses 12 to 17. As God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, clothe yourselves with compassion and kindness and humility and meekness and patience. Bear with one another, and if anyone has a complaint against another, forgive each other. Just as the Lord has forgiven you, so you must also forgive. Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in one body, and be thankful. Let the words of Christ dwell richly. Teach and admonish one another in all wisdom and with gratitude in your hearts. Sing psalms and hymns, spiritual songs to God. And whatever you do in word, in deed, do everything in the name of the Lord, giving thanks to God the Father through him. God add rich blessings to the hearing of his word. I do have a problem with this Sunday's 4 lessons. It's just a preacher's musings, nothing more. On the one hand, we read a story in the Old Testament about Samuel growing taller. Okay. A psalm extolling the virtues of gods and the praising of God. I'm all for that. Then a 12-year-old boy, Jesus, mesmerizing religious leaders at the temple. Okay. And then this beautiful, majestic letter written by presumably Paul, probably not, but let's assume it was Paul for our sake this morning, to the Colossians brothers and sisters, whom actually he may not have even met before because he never did travel to the city. Somehow, as I'm reading and studying this week, this set of 4 lessons, I find this disjointing among the lessons, at least for me. Especially the lesson that we've read. The lesson that we've read seems so old-fashioned, so too, in the words of some eloquent politicians, too politically correct. Let me explain what I mean, and I'm going to get to the jugular of my message for this morning. Just jump straight into it. I believe it's too bad that the Colossians reading for this morning, chapter 3, verses 12 to 17, isn't smack in the middle in the Revised Common Lectionary reading for Christmas Day, and the Advent season. That it isn't in the middle, but instead, all of a sudden, we go through this whole Christmas season, and then all of a sudden, we have Christmas Day, and all of the majesty of the days before, all of a sudden, seem to end, and we are now into this whole new series of conversations in the readings. No longer do we see a baby in the manger, or Mary and Joseph struggling with the wonder of the presence of the Christ child, and all of us singing about him and his glory and his presence in the world. And all of a sudden, right after Christmas, everything ends. As if somehow Christmas ended. Advent season ended. From my perspective, I would have preferred that this lesson for this morning was placed right next to Matthew and Luke's version of the Christmas story to remind us of why the Christ child appeared in the world. Situated 2 days after Christmas seems to me lessen the splendor, the everyday human-to-human transformational application and meaning of the Christmas story. Again, we have 3 weeks right after Thanksgiving, almost 3.5 weeks with all of this majesty, all of the pageantry, all of the beauty of Christmas and the child and holy, holy, holy. And then all of a sudden, the Sunday right after Christmas Day, boom, it disappears, seemingly. My critique. And I have a deep problem with that. Because again, it lessens for us, I think, the meaning, real, transformational meaning of the power of Christmas. For people like you and me, middle class, upper middle class, good, hard-working people who play by the rules and pay their taxes, but happen to follow Jesus of Nazareth as his disciples. A deep, profound concern about that all of a sudden drop in the energy level from one Sunday to another. I'm convinced that Christmas can only become tangible in us, inside of us, beyond a plastic baby, in a plaster-laden manger, when we understand that this fascinating event of Jesus appearing in the world is intrinsically tied to the demand of the Colossians letter to the Colossian Christians by the writer who extols the virtue, who challenges the believer to clothe themselves with the sweet invitation of mercifulness, of kindness, of humility, of gentility, of patience, of forgiveness and loving rather than spiteful, hateful, and the disdaining of the other that I am just so often hearing in the last several months of this political season. God knows we so desperately need to return to these noble traits in our country and in our world. Qualities that I believe have been co-opted by hateful and mindless political and social Neanderthals invading the airwaves and social discourse between good people of differences of opinion. And I also believe that we can live these transformational traits even as we go after and destroy and just see disappear evil from everything from ISIS barbarians to injustice and equality in the world. I believe you can. I'm not too political, but I'm as political as anyone in this room. And my message this morning is not about politics. Absolutely not. I'd offend too many folks if I did. But followers of Jesus at Windermere Church, please don't get caught up. Don't get caught up with the wave of the spitefulness that we're seeing in the airwaves and in our political discourse. Please don't. Please don't. Remember where we came from. Remember whose we belong to whom we belong, where we came from, our roots. We're rooted in a gospel of love and graciousness and peace and gentleness and good-heartedness and patience and love, which is the undergirding of everything that we believe in and whom we believe. And anything less than that, anything outside of those boundaries, as exemplified in the Colossian lesson that we've read for this morning, would be minimizing the Jesus of not only the cross, but the Jesus of the manger, whom he invites all of us to be his disciples. Don't get caught up with that. Please don't. I won't mention any names, so I won't get any trouble. My invitation for each one of us this morning is to embrace those Christ-imagined, Christ-like values and traits of the church universal throughout the ages in the midst of a world of such hatred, both in the first century or the 21st. Values of mercy and kindness and humility and gentleness and patience and forgiveness and love, rather than spitefulness, hatefulness, and the disdaining of the other. And it begins with you and you and you and me. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Amen. Let's pray. Oh God, we thank you this morning for your word. We thank you for our time together, for allowing us to, as your people, gather in holy majesty before you. Thank you for the privilege of worship. Thank you for the joy of gathering together as brothers and sisters, bound by love. Oh, blessed be your holy name. So I bless you, Windermere Church. I bless you, and I pray that we continue to celebrate the Advent season and Christmas Day the rest of the year. But that we model it not by what we hear in this again, lack of a better word, spiteful or phrase, spiteful political season where everyone is against the other and everybody is an enemy. Where in God's green earth did we ever get that idea to be that way, to think that way, to speak that way as the people of God? I know none of you in Windermere do, but just in case, go in peace, and Merry Christmas again.